We're joined by Sonia Dallimore from Vista Financial Services. Hi Sonia.
Hello Kerry, how are you doing?
I'm wonderfully well, thank you.
Doing great.
You're a specialist in aged
care.
Aged care, cool. Okay, so you would come across, we're dealing with estate planning of course, you would come across the outcomes of good and bad estate planning.
Absolutely. It's actually imperative when we're formulating an aged care plan that we look in detail, in quite detail, into an individual's will and or enduring power of attorneys as part of the strategy, because it could have quite an impact on the strategy that we use in order to get them into a nursing home or to a hostel.
Could you give us an example of a poor piece of estate planning and what the outcome actually was for the client?
Yeah, certainly. I guess one particular client comes to mind in that when people formulate their wills, a lot of thought has to be given into how that will is constructed or how it's worded. And I had this particular client whereby she had 2 daughters and a number of grandchildren. And within her will, she had specified that she specified her home and the address, and basically stated that that was to be left to her 2 daughters, and the residual estate to be left to her grandchildren. And we're looking at a considerable amount of money here. So her home was worth $1 million, the residual estate worth $200,000. So upon her passing, not an issue. The home could be sold, and the assets will pass accordingly. However, in an aged care space, the fact that she had specified that home, that it could not be sold until she had passed, really restricted what we could do for her to get her into the hostel. So that was just an example of how where if you formulate a will, it's really, really important to get some advice in view of things that potentially may happen, so that the will is worded in such a way that it can allow for some flexibility if you need to.
So Sonia, this is actually a surprise example.
Mm-hmm.
I was expecting an example of someone who didn't have a will or something like this, but you brought in a whole different concept.
Mm-hmm.
I guess this woman didn't have testamentary capacity, so she couldn't redo her will. She was stuck with it.
Correct, because the lady suffered from Alzheimer's, so
yeah.
she was unable to make any adjustments to her will, and or, yes, exactly, that's right, she had no capacity.
So I was expecting a horror story about, you know, fights and brothers and sisters and guns at dawn and swords.
Well, the interesting part of it, the case gets a little bit more interesting, which illustrates that exact scenario, in that the mum, not only had she left, had nominated the beneficiaries for the estate and for the residual estate, the 7 individual beneficiaries were also nominated the executors, which also meant that if the house was to be sold as part of the strategy, that those 7 individuals would have had to have come to some sort of agreement in order for that house sale to occur, in order for that, when Mum did eventually pass, that the estate could be divided accordingly. And as we know, to get 7 people in agreement, you know, across a number of states in Australia, it was impossible.
Could you give us an example of a good estate plan and how that actually aided and helped the people who had to?
Yeah, I guess typically when we think of an estate plan, we think of just a will, and the will is the legal document that binds it all together. But the other aspects that that formulate a really good, strong estate plan are ensuring that you have powers of attorney in place. And we know that there is a different number of types of power of attorneys. We have enduring, medical, and general or financial. So, and the other things that we need to give consideration to when we're preparing our, you know, our financial plans is ownership of assets, is just to make sure that they're owned accordingly, so that upon passing they distribute simply, but also to make sure that if there's a liability incurred by the owner of the asset, that there's protection in place, so that upon their passing, you know, that there's not a financial burden left on an individual. Mm-hmm. So if all these preliminary things are taken into consideration, when it comes for the will to be put in force, then it happens seamlessly. And I have a number of aged care clients that have these plans put in place. I haven't had anyone pass on me yet, but essentially you can see when you're sitting with them that they've got the will, that the will is worded in such a way that you know that there's not going to be any contest, because there's a minimum amount of beneficiaries and their executors and all the rest of it. But also there's power of attorneys in place. You know that the asset structures can be dealt with quite swiftly, and also, you know, if there's protection, that there's protection in place that could help allow for the asset to transition quite seamlessly upon death as well.
Yeah, I'm really pleased I asked you to speak on this subject, because you've brought in a whole different concept about estate planning that really I had skipped over in my practice because I wasn't an age specialist. My experience of this is that people die and siblings argue, and assets are gifted in name that don't exist, and all of the rest of the things. We'll probably hear about some of these examples. Look, Sonia, thank you very much. It's a superb perspective you presented to our viewers.
Pleasure.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us. We'll see you after the break.